One tran.
You're looking at yourself in the mirror and you're just like, there I am.
One professor.
Come.
One dilemma.
A few weeks ago, the wise folks at Twitter deemed it necessary to suspend my access to that platform.
One victor. In the battle for dominance, who will win? One guy getting a routine surgery? Or an old man crying about how the idea of one less titty to the world is a threat to human civilization? Elliot Page won. Elliot Page, everybody. Elliot Page. Christ, didn't the other guy used to be like a huge deal? What happened to him? Good evening, woke moralists. Hello and welcome to postmodern neo-Marxist YouTube show, The Empire Statement. I am your host, Bridget Empire, criminal physician and defiler of the female form, and I am here to talk to you about the moment that broke legendary psychology professor and podcast crybaby Jordan Peterson. Yes, the lobster daddy may have had a good run convincing every creepy guy I met at the pub the last 5 years they were always right about feminism being stupid actually, but it turns out not even the alt-right's greatest Kermit the Frog impersonator can survive the combined might of a glass of apple cider, steak for dinner, and a trans man getting top surgery. Yes, just that last part is somehow the hill he has died on. Then again, transphobia was also the hill he started on, so full circle.
Bill C-16 purported to do nothing but extend human rights provisions to an excluded group, let's say, to the transgender and non-gender binary types, and that was the federal legislation. It also made it a hate crime to discriminate or harass, essentially. So now then the question is, well, what exactly do you mean by discriminate or harass? And why exactly is that a hate crime under the criminal code? Well, there was an answer to that. The answer was, well, this bill will be interpreted in light of the policies generated by the Ontario Human Rights Commission. Very large set of policies. Now, the Ontario Human Rights Commission is a radically leftist organization. I think it's the most dangerous organization in Canada, although you could debate that. And they set all sorts of policies about how this legislation was going to be interpreted, and the federal government linked to their website to state that Bill C-16 would be interpreted in light of those guidelines. So I went and read all the policies. Well, one of the policies was that if you didn't use the preferred pronouns of a given group, that you could be charged essentially with a hate crime. And I thought, no,
which given group is that? You're talking about transgender people.
Yeah, and so there's all these pronouns that have come up. There's 70 different sets of pronouns approximately to hypothetically describe people who don't fit anywhere on the gender spectrum, which is also something that I don't really understand. I don't understand that conceptually.
We'll come to that. But I just want to hear the story of this bill first.
Okay, so now a person is compelled under Canadian law to use the pronoun of another individual's choice on pain of law.
Not content to be famous for writing a generic self-help book, for being that one transphobic guy from TV, or for going on an all-meat diet so severe you go into a coma in Serbia and become terrified of the concept of cider, Jordan Peterson has returned to internet prominence once again to grace our screens with his humble presence, this time for the Daily Wire, which is a bit less prestigious than a Toronto University, but, you know, we can't all be winners. Well, once, however, he gave multiple-hour lectures about how women are chaos dragons. Now he gives weird half-coherent rants to a single camera about how he'll never log off.
Breasts. And second, come. That doesn't exist, by the way. It's a serious disease.
And why would he do this, you ask? Why ruin a perfectly good life crying on the Joe Rogan Experience and being respected by thousands of the worst people on the planet by making a spectacle of himself? Because the idea of Elliot Page, successful actor, my T4T crush, and all-around badass transitioning, broke his brain. Seriously, listen to the way he talks about Elliot Page. It genuinely broke his brain.
at the actress/actor Ellen, now Elliot Page, who I criticized, along with his or her physician, for publicly trumpeting and publicizing the decision to have her perfectly functional breasts removed in the attempt to switch sexes. LOL, LMFAO, bro, bra, dude comments that would get anyone who dared utter even one of them in person to their targets immediately punched in that mocking, cowardly, self-aggrandizing face, means that your platform represents a signal threat to the integrity of the discourse upon which the stability of your country and the mental health of its youth depend. To help you run your benighted and blighted direct democracy, mob rule, psychopath-dominated communication platform have the moral standing to render the kind of arbitrary and careless judgment on the behavior of others you deem inappropriate.
Remember when pride was a sin? And Ellen Page just had her breasts removed by a criminal physician. And then a link to a story that detailed out the happenings. The response from Twitter, quote, violating our rules against hateful conduct. What rules, you sons of bitches? Exactly. Precisely. Because such things matter when the accusations start flying. Pride was a sin and had been recognized as perhaps the cardinal sin for thousands of years previously. It still might be regarded as unacceptable to the woke authoritarian moralists who now insist, for example, that we celebrate Pride Month, not hour or day or week, but month, and who have literally called it Pride Month. Insane activists as dead naming, which is the act of referring to someone who has transitioned, another hated piece of jargon and slogan, by the name and by the inference, the gender, really the sex, that everyone knew them by previously, and in the case of Ellen/Elliot, that millions of people recognized and knew. So I should have either called him, her, they, Elliot, instead of Ellen, although as we will discover, that would have made it impossible for me to say what I wanted to and need to say in the remaining phrases. Not that such a problem would bother those who are objecting to my speech in the first place. The next phrase is, just had her breasts removed. This bit suffers from a very similar problem. I employed the forbidden pronoun her when Elliot, Ellen, is now to be regarded as a he or else. But there's a conundrum here, to say the least, and not just for me, although I have been banned because of it. Was Elliot/Ellen a she or a he, or Ellen or Elliot, when she or he or they, that's Elliot or Elliot by the way, had his or her or their breasts removed? If he or she was a he, then why was it necessary to have the mastectomy? And how could those I am writing to make sense of what I was saying if it was his breasts that were removed? Were those male breasts or female breasts that were removed? If they were male breasts, then why were they removed? If they were female breasts and had therefore become objectionable to the degree that surgery generally reserved for cancer treatment was required, was morally obligatory, then wasn't Elliot still Ellen and he still she? How could I possibly have written that sentence in any sensible manner whatsoever? Was he Elliot then? When exactly? Exactly. He was definitely Ellen at some point in the past, or so indicate all his, her, them, their film credits. Will all those have to be reshot since they employed the hated dead name? That doesn't exist, by the way, that dead name category, except in the sensorial and addled minds of a tiny fraction of insanely narcissistic and increasingly dangerous trans activists. When precisely was it incumbent on me to switch my terminology in regard to Elliot/Ellen so that I was not engaging in hateful conduct? And how can I describe the fact that someone who was once a woman, and really still is, had her breasts cut off because she, he, they, their, them had fallen prey to a viciously harmful fad. Along with that. So by acquiescing to this surgery and by publicizing it, and by insisting upon the sanctity and the moral virtue of his, her, their new, expensive, dangerous, and medically enhanced identity, and by participating in the whole identity charade, Ellen/Elliot has undoubtedly, with his, her, their so-called courage, enticed many a poor, confused adolescent, girl most likely, to blame her emergent pubescent self-consciousness, confusion, and discomfort on being born in the wrong body and believing that the courageous, self-affirming, and morally admirable route is hormonal treatment, sterilization, subjugation to a lifetime of expensive medical complication. How delightfully profitable is that? And misery. Criminal physician. I must say that I've had some post-coital, so to speak, regrets about that phrase. It is clearly the case that the surgical operation performed by the butchers who butchered Elliot/Ellen was legal. So, was it criminal or not? Were the operations undertaken by the fascist physicians who carried out the Nazi medical experiments legal? Yes, under the laws of the time. Rules. Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
So you might well ask, what possibly could bring an old Canadian professor to talk about a stranger's chest in such a strange way? How does Jordan Peterson know how functional Elliot's chest was? What evidence does he have that Page broke the law by yeeting the teat? And what law might that be? And what possible criminal charges might be brought up to try a doctor for performing a basic medical procedure to a consenting adult? Well, the answer to all of those questions comes down to one basic super simple fact, and it's that Jordan Peterson believes, in some level, that a woman's body does not belong to its owner, but to the men of the world. And Elliott Page rejecting part of his body, that's criminal, because it never belonged to him. Confused? Let me back up. To Jordan Peterson, Elliott Page had a woman's body. To Jordan Peterson, a woman's body is not a separate agent with feelings and a brain, but an object. A thing to be observed, desired, and ultimately consumed. Importantly, he doesn't think this about man's bodies. Thus, the transformation of a celebrity such as Page's body from an object of desire to one of agency and without tits has taken something away from Dr. Peterson. Where once there was an object for consumption, now there is a man with agency. How do we deal with that? Is it a criminal act? Well, if you see people the way Peterson does, you just took agency away from those with agency, the men's observing Page, and gave it to Elliot himself, who Peterson already long ago decided had no say in how people view his body. And why? Because Elliot wasn't born in the magical boss bitch gender, or what Jordan Peterson might fondly call a man.
What I guess they call themselves incels, involuntary celibates. When all this stuff went down, when this guy drove his car into a group of people, it's a horrible tragedy. One of the things that you talked about with incels is that, and this was a part of the what was it? It was a New York Times hit piece.
Yeah.
You said one of the cures for this is enforced monogamy.
This might sound like a drastic diagnosis of the situation, but it really isn't. Jordan Peterson has long talked about enforced monogamy and distributing women across the population, some sort of universal basic pussy service to quell the libidos of his incel army. It isn't much of a stretch from there to imagine the lack of agency he places upon anyone assigned female at birth extends to what they are permitted to do with their own bodies.
You know, I was pilloried a few years back for my comments about enforced monogamy because they were taken out of context and twisted in exactly the way that things like that get twisted now. But
what did you mean by that?
I mean that one human universal is the construction of societies to both mandate and reward monogamy. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. It's because it's the best long-term solution, fundamentally. But one of the reasons for that is that when women are scarce, men get violent. Now, that was read to say, well, I thought that this society should be distributing women to undeserving men, which is, of course, absolutely and utterly preposterous and bears no relationship whatsoever to anything I ever said or thought, or anything anyone sane would ever think or say, or has ever thought or said. Because I don't know anyone politically ever who was insane enough to think that the state should distribute women to men. Like, that's just never happened. So to be accused of that belief, and then for that to, be put forward as a credible representation of what I thought was just one of the preposterous things that has happened to me.
It's an unfortunate name, enforced monogamy, because it's a term from anthropology, right? But what you mean is culturally celebrated monogamy, culturally and norms that are supporting people and raising that up as an institution.
Supporting and punishing, both, but mostly supporting. I mean, the punishing is that there's a moral disapproval applied to, say, cheating, right? To adultery, to especially running around behind your partner's back if you're married, particularly that. But even if you're in a long-term stable relationship, it's like, well, that's all enforcement. It's not police with jackboots, but that's not the only type of enforcement. It's not the only type of sanction or threat or punishment or disappropriation or disgust or contempt or shame or frustration or disappointment, all of those things.
The way he talks about Elliot Page makes it clear he feels a personal slight over the removal of a stranger's breast tissue. Clearly, on some level, he feels that he personally has been hurt by the existence of a trans man of such Chad status as Elliot fucking Page. In fact, if we look at Peterson's behaviour pretty much forever, the way his worldview fundamentally revolves around the objectification and commodification of people he perceives as women is plain to see. He's always talked about the idea of the feminine as if it was some strange, unknowable alien force, even when he was doing his dry science talks. And one of his most recent scandals, publicly denouncing a model as sorry, not beautiful, for having the audacity to not be conventionally skinny, suggests he fundamentally believes there is an ideological battle to be fought for the most traditional, and let's be honest, fucking boring, of gender roles, to be firm, rigid, and unmoving, not like a titty at all. Return to some sort of wet dream from the 1950s, all of the nuance removed, all worries gone, just vibes, not a phone in sight.
Deviate from that, we tilt towards a more violent society. I was making a very minor point.
I don't think they're related, quite honestly. I don't think that involuntary celibates, I don't think that having enforced monogamy as a part of our cultural norm is going to help those people. I really don't.
It does.
How's it going to help them?
Well, because what happens is if a polygamous society develops, which is the alternative, then a small minority of men get all the women. That's what happens.
Oh, okay, I could see
that's
that.
All. That's the only point that I was making.
This theoretical world where polygamous societies exist en masse, and then you do have this problem where there's a small group of men that are fucking all the women. But that's not what we're talking about.
And also making the women unhappy, right? Because the women don't have any access to a genuine, intimate, one-to-one relationship over any long period of time.
Which
so
is what the women want. It's the whole idea is that
what's best
the women
for kids
want
too.
that. Right, sure, if you have children.
Peterson fundamentally seems to believe that gender is both essential and immutable. That's why he was so distraught at the idea of possibly having to use she/her pronouns for some of his students that were assigned male at birth, which is the incident that brought him to the public limelight in the first place. And it, too, is why he sees Elliot Page's transition as a slight against him personally. The idea that gender is not only messy, but mutable, is entirely threatening to his worldview. If beloved trans Chad Elliot Page can get the Chad surgery, what does this say about Jordan Peterson's views on women? What does this say about Jordan Peterson's views on women? Well, it certainly would suggest gender roles aren't as clean as he'd always thought, and that would be awkward, given the whole female chaos dragon thing he was chatting shit about for his whole academic career. And it might too suggest that perhaps people can make the choice to transition because they want to, and that's a scary idea to a man like Peterson. Scarier than apple cider. That suggests that trans people have agency in their own lives. That the existence of trans people isn't some cruel joke or the result of years of abuse. That the existence of trans people is as fundamental to the human condition as the existence of gender itself. And don't you remember how Peterson built his career? That's right, he became famous for being the one transphobic professor left in Canada. The one thing Peterson cannot abide by is the bending of gender norms, and for some reason, he was pretty attached to the idea of Elliot Page sticking to the norms his doctors assigned him at birth. Now, I might suggest he stop that and get over it. But it's clear we've moved beyond that now. This situation has truly broken his brain, and he's doing what we on the left like to call posting through it to cope. Also, this is just, I get very weirdly horny vibes from the way he talks about this, and it's just new levels of creepy to be talking about a trans guy's chest the way he does, as if he's mourning some ex-girlfriend. He's not going to date you, bud. Now, is this fair? Is this an evidenced and reasoned argument? Not really, but Peterson's been making blanket nonsense claims about trans people for years. If anything, we take him too seriously. If he's going to continue to talk about trans people as if we are criminals for acting with bodily autonomy, I can only assume it's fair that we cease treating him like a man who deserves respect and start talking about him like the sad old man he is. I think Jordan Peterson is a transphobic, sexist, broken-brained little weasel, and frankly, that statement has far more evidence behind it than the claim that Elliot Page's physician is a criminal for performing top surgery, and if anything, gives him more respect than he deserves. If someone were talking about my perfectly functional breasts as if they're an expert, I'd be highly tempted to press the big red lawsuit button, especially were I as influential as Elliot Page. Hint. Elliot. Cancel his free speech, Elliot. Choose violence, Elliot. Become the woke moralist, Elliot. Show him who cancels who. At least then, when he says the woke mob have come for him, we'll be able to be like, yeah, we did actually, and it was great. You had it coming. If anything, going after a free speech is a win-win. It's what both sides want, and for the plus side, it'd be really fucking funny. Please, Elliot. Please. For me. And if Jordan is still mad that a pair of perfectly functional breasts have been lost in the gender wars, there are plenty of us whose breasts are becoming more functional than ever. He doesn't think that counts, but that's fine. One more pair of tits in the world is one more pair of tits to me, because my definition of gender isn't hinged on some existential dread that once the boundaries of man and woman are immutable, the Garden of Eden will come tumbling down and Satan will descend upon the earth to harvest our sinful flesh. I have tits where I didn't before. The balance of the world has been restored. Rest easy, Dr. Peterson. You need not rant any longer. The transes? We've won. There's no point fighting any longer. And these videos? They're just sad. Are you really mad about the destruction of a healthy titty? Or did you have some weird idea that you'd be able to do something to that titty eventually? One day? Be honest. Does the destruction of titty wound you? Because titty is a fundamental source of good in the world? As it is. Or do titties belong to you and your ilk to distribute as you see fit? Well, clearly they don't. And in a world where you literally have a daughter, you should really have learned to be less weird about the way you talk about other people's titties by now. Whether they're ex-titties or extant titties. If titty, the word, had any meaning to you before, congratulations on it losing any meaning now. Christ, this has broken my brain now. Is this what trying to make sense of Jordan Peterson does to you? Maybe I should try some apple cider. See if I can't walk a mile in his shoes. Of course, as an academic without a permanent position, I couldn't imagine how hard it would be to be a permanent member of staff with tenure at a prestigious university. I'm sure the precarity of my working system, with all temporary contracts, years between employment, and no fucking money, is nothing compared to the stress of having to respect the odd student's preferred pronouns, but I should try and imagine. To be fair to the guy, after all, to truly understand someone, you must learn to think like them. Take a walk in his shoes.
Sulfites, and we had some apple cider that had sulfites in it, and that was really not good. Like, I was done for a month. That was the first time I talked to Sam Harris.
You were done for a month?
Oh yeah, it took me out for a month. It was awful.
Really?
Yeah. So I would say,
so
look.
So this is right before this whole truth conversation with Sam Harris that got stuck in the mud. During.
So I think the day I talked to Sam was like the worst day of my life. Not because of talking to Sam, but it was
just physical.
Oh Jesus, I was so dead. But I didn't want to not do it because
apple cider. Like, what was it doing?
Sulfites in it.
What was it doing to you?
Oh, it produced an overwhelming sense of impending doom.
Okay, so I'm just gonna pull up the Wikipedia page for Elliott Page, as Jordan Peterson has undoubtedly done many times, to cry sadly about the titty that he will no longer, I suppose, be able to ever access, not that he would have done before. So I'm just going to read this page and imagine I'm Peterson by reading it in his voice and trying to summon what he must have felt like when he found out that Elliott Page was in fact transgender. Elliott Page is a Canadian actor and producer. He has received various accolades, including an Academy Award, 2 BAFTA Awards, and a Primetime Emmy Award nominations and a Satellite Award. I do actually see why he cries quite a lot. It's quite hard to do an impression of him without sounding like you're crying. Let's skip down to the trans bit. On December 1st, 2020, Page came out as a trans man on his social media accounts. This is sounding much more like Christopher Walken than I think I ever intended it to. Specified his pronouns as he and they, and revealed his name, Elliot. Page explained his decision to speak openly about his gender identity was partially prompted by the COVID-19 pandemic and partially by the anti-transgender rhetoric in politics and the news cycle. GLAAD spokesperson Nick Adams stated that Page will now be an inspiration to countless trans and non-binary people. Page's then wife, Emma Portner, expressed support for him coming out that same day on her Instagram account, saying she was so proud of Page. Netflix tweeted, "So proud of our superhero. We love you, Elliot." Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and several celebrities such as Ellen DeGeneres, Miley Cyrus, James Gunn, and Kumail Nanjiani expressed support for Page after the announcement. That same day, Netflix announced it would update Page's credits or metadata across all titles to reflect his name. These changes were completed by December 8th. Jeez, okay, Jordan. I think I understand. And I think I have the solution for you. I think you need something that we in the trans community call voice training. With voice training, you can develop a voice that makes you less prone to break out into weird emotional fits. And probably would do something about the apple cider thing, because at this point, I would be willing to try anything. Like, if I'd gone into like a meat coma and then had an overwhelming sense of terror after drinking a glass of anything, I would probably seek medical help beyond Russia and Serbia. Not that there's anything wrong with Russia or Serbian doctors, I'm sure, but just because that sounds like a fucked up thing to do, especially if you genuinely think it was caused by the cider. Anyway, what I've learned is that trying to do things in a voice that even tries to approximate yours makes you feel very upset, and also read things in a way which makes you sound both angry and also sad. So, yeah, voice training. I mean, it's worked wonders for me, clearly. I still sound like a man, but at least I'm not fucking crying most of the time. I mean, I probably will after I make this, because I'm going to have to listen to myself doing that impression. Yeah, the more I think about it, the more maybe I shouldn't have done that. Hello, are you still here? Good. Okay, listen. I would like you to like and subscribe to this channel. And also to subscribe to my Patreon. That would be dope. Wouldn't that be good? I really like it when people do that. And if you do, I'll read your name out at the end of the credits to each video. And also the podcast. And also, the podcast that I do with my friend, Zephyr, who runs the Alexander channel on YouTube, is also really good. And also, if you join the Patreon, then you can ask questions on the podcast through the Patreon. Or on here, if you want to, I guess. And you can comment on it. I mean, I've not really established my Patreon, my what the limits are to my Patreon. If you want to give me money, you can ask me whatever the fuck you want. Go for it. Go do it at patreon.com/BridgetEmpire or ko-fi.com/BridgetEmpire to make a one-time donation. Thank you very much. Oh, the patrons are Scarjan, Joey Cobalt, and Naomi Wayne. Maybe I should have done that in the Jordan Peterson voice. Maybe next time.